So we'll move on to our final talk of the day. This comes from Eden Kupermintz, who holds a BA in history and philosophy and has been fascinated with and passionate about science fiction, metal, and literature for the past 2 decades. He has written and given numerous talks on these topics, covering the future of the state, urbanism, space exploration, the body, and many other futures. Eden curates the online archive anarchySF, is co-host for the Death Sentence Literary Podcast, is editor-in-chief for Heavy Blog is Heavy, and does some work for corporations so he can eat. And he comes to us today with a presentation titled Strange Cousins from the West, Clutch and the Construction or Reconstruction of American Mythology. Take it away, Eden.
Thank you, Jeremy, for the introduction. And I also want to take this chance to thank everyone for making me feel welcome in this conference. It's super non-obvious that you open up an academic conference to the wider public, and that you've given me this opportunity to speak here. It's especially moving for me because my wife is actually doing her PhD in classics at Brown University. So I kind of feel like, this is extended family in a way. So I'm really, really happy to be here, and I'm really appreciative of you giving me this opportunity. Let me share my screen and we can get started. So we are going to be talking today about Clutch and their usage of mythology in their lyrics and album art and covers. To start, we will be talking about, well, what is Clutch? Funnily enough, Clutch is a super successful American rock, and in earlier days also had punk and metal elements in their sound from the US. But even though they are super successful and have collaborated with bands like Mastodon, Lamb of God, Sepultura, Soulfly, and many other names, they remain sort of underrated in a lot of circles and underknown. So these are the dry facts. Clutch was formed in 1991 in Maryland in the US, and all of the current members that are still in Clutch are also the founding members, which is super impressive considering they've been going on for several decades now and have many, many albums and have been touring all this time and so on. They've released 13 studio albums and a lot of rarities and live albums, and they also have their own record label. Okay, but the dry facts is not actually what we mean when we say Clutch, right? So let's ask who are Clutch and talk a little bit about those names and what stands behind them. I'm going to show you the photos of the people who are in the band. And as I'm doing so, I want you to consider how they kind of interact with the history of the band, as I just told it to you, and where they were founded in the US. You'll see that if I were to put these people away from their instruments and you'd meet them at, like, I don't know, some sort of like a bar or a barbecue or whatever, they all seem like, maybe working class or middle class Americans. To be frank, they look like American dads, right? They look like someone who you'd have a few cold beers with. And that is not just by accident or by virtue of their own biography. It is a lot to do with how they construct the personality of their band. Clutch is very unapologetically American and a specific type of American. Neil Fallon, on whom we will be focusing a lot of our discussion, the vocalist and main lyricist for Clutch, is from Virginia. And the rest of the band are from that area of the US. And they channel that kind of, salt of the earth, working class, East Coast sort of aesthetic and mentality, both in their lyrics, in their online presence, and so on. So think about simplicity, straight shooting, as the Americans say, and a sort of willingness to work and for grit that is tied into the American mythos and storytelling and cultural milieu in which Clutch operate. Again, I said we'd be focusing about Neil Fallon, so I put a bunch of red arrows next to his face. And one of my favorite quotes by him, "Yeah, is the duct tape of rock and roll." And that is kind of the personality that Fallon has built for himself. Rock and roll with the big beard and his booming voice and his stage presence. Interestingly enough, Fallon also has a BA in English literature, which he got from the University of Maryland in 1993. That is 2 years after Clutch was founded and had already released the earlier albums. And that kind of knowledge and eruditeness that Fallon has due to his degree comes up a lot in the lyrics and in the iconography of the band. To sum up the discussion of who Clutch are, I want to play you a minute from Hot Bottom Feeder, which is a track from their album, The Book of Bad Decisions, which was released in 2018. It is literally just a recipe for how to make Maryland crab cake. And just look at how Neil comports himself in this video and listen to the lyrics, and it will drive home a lot of those messages about their American identity that I mentioned. Okay, just in those two lines, right? They have to start with American exceptionalism and setting them in contrast to other nations. And again, that simplicity with, the apron and the home kitchen, right? It's not a mansion. It's not like an MTV Cribs, right? It's just an American kitchen, an American house. So that kind of like everything that I wanted to say says it so much better. Great. So let's talk about Clutch and their relationship with pre-modern mythology, which prefigures heavily in all of their lyrics. I did a kind of agile move here, and I will avoid defining the term mythology, instead just drawing on a few aspects and elements of it. The first one is pastiche. The slides got moved around here. Pastiche is the, you can think about it as homage or the liberty in using parts and pieces from different works of art to refer to them and wield them in all sorts of ways. And that is probably Clutch's most obvious element and use of mythology. On Jam Room from 1999, which for years was out of print and only got re-released once Clutch enjoyed success, they have maybe the lowest hanging fruit I could have used for this talk, the song Release the Kraken, which references, instead of the original myth, it references the film The Clash of Titans in 1981, a very famous piece of cultural American artifact. And you can see it in kind of the lyrics that I highlighted. It starts with words about bomb shelters and droughts and so on. But then the last piece of the track is literally just a retelling of the story of Perseus, almost line by line, except that they don't mention him by name. Like Neil is literally telling you the Greek legend line by line, blow by blow. And very interestingly, they start to blend modern ideas like a bomb shelter and the original myths. Pressing on, of course, Perseus is a very good example of the hero myth, which is a very important part of pre-modern mythology, the kind of glorification and boasting about the deeds and accomplishments of the hero, which of course fit very well again with that persona of Neil Fallon and Clutch, as we just saw displayed, and also prefigures quite heavily in their lyrics. For example, from the album The Elephant Riders, 1998, which by the way I mentioned yesterday in the talk about horses, this album imagines a regiment of elephant cavalry in the American Civil War, and that's what you see here on the cover. It also features the track The Yeti, which references the Asian and other places in the world. They all have this myth of the abominable snowman or the Yeti and so on. And in American mythology and folklore, the Sasquatch. But here you can see that the deeds of the narrator are accentuated, right? The first paragraph opens with his motivations, right? The narrator and not the Yeti. The Yeti serves here to outline or shine a light on the mental states and the deeds of the hero telling the tale. Again, you see the pastiche here as well, right? The Yeti approaches this person in the mountain, and the mountain is whispering up a prayer to a Christian god, right, or a monotheistic god, and not necessarily to any of the local deities or to the creature itself, or so on. So we'll keep seeing this, how Clutch are very, very loose with their sources and how they blend things together, which leads me to the last element of mythology, which I will focus on, and that is the relationship between nature and divinity. Of course, in mythology, gods are often linked, and their deeds are often linked to natural phenomenon like storms and volcanoes and floods, and so on. In Clutch's case, this takes on the form of the sort of the divinity of nature itself, which is more of a modern notion, but they instrumentalize images from pre-modern mythology to bring that sort of natural divinity forward. We can see that on the track La Curandera, again, pastiche, right? Taking from Latin American traditions of witchcraft and mythology and injecting it with a sort of more European or Anglo-Saxon American element. This is the cover for the single, which was released. And when I was making this slideshow, I realized that this is kind of a gender-bended version of Perseus, right? It's not a curandera, it's not a healer or a mystic, which is what curandera usually stands for, but rather the sort of Perseus fighting the Medusa. And if you look at the bottom of the lyrics that I highlighted here, you can see that sort of mythology, nature, and divinity mixing together, right? The king of the briar, the lord of the weather, the scale and the feather, and so on. And we will see these elements play in further tracks that we look at. Okay, so those are the elements of pre-modern mythology that Clutch are deploying. But what about American mythology? Well, what is American mythology and how can we define it? I'm going to do this super fast. We could do an entire talk just on this topic. I think it's super fascinating. But we will be looking at the same three elements that we already decided to focus on from mythology. The first one is pastiche in American culture. The second one, replacing the hero myth, we have what's called the tall tales in American folklore, stories of grand deeds of people in American history. And lastly, the divinity of nature here is exemplified in the concepts of the Church of the Heart and the natural cathedral as they pertain to the American Great Awakening. And we'll look at examples of that very, very soon. So pastiche is the easiest one, again, low-hanging fruit and very easy to pick out in American culture because it literally starts from the very foundational moments of America. All of the American symbols of governance and authority and all of the inspirations for the earlier texts and political ideas of America are a pastiche of Roman symbology, mostly, but also Jesuit symbology, Mason symbology, and so on and so forth. And just to be clear, I'm not doing like a conspiracy theory, the Illuminati founded America. I'm just talking about the aesthetic borrowings of these symbols and ideas. This is the great seal of the United States, the front and the back of it. And I think the pastiche here is very, very clear, kind of blends ideas from many different cultures and myths into a new symbol and a new way to conceptualize this burgeoning and young state. Tall tales are also very common and something which is easy to find. These dot the American historical landscape from the 19th century onwards. And even before that, if you think about George Washington as the original tall tale, right? Crossing the river in the fog and fasting alongside his troops and arriving from nowhere to defeat the British. But examples proliferate across American culture, like Paul Bunyan, the legendary lumberjack who could take down complete forests with one hand. And of course, his trusty sidekick, Babe the Blue Ox. We could also do a lecture here about Mithras and Mithraic cult worship and how it prefigures in American culture. And another very famous example is John Henry, the riveter who defeated the steam-powered engine in laying down railroad tracks. And these are very similar to hero myths in pre-modern mythology, right? You can think of John Henry as a Hercules sort of figure with his labors and physical strength and so on. And then lastly, the idea of the divinity of nature of course, arose in the United States with the Great Awakening, both Great Awakenings, that kind of railed against the what they saw as a scholastic, intellectual, atrophied nature of the Reformation, and called for a return to a more popular and emotional sort of religion. Of course, also taking the sermons, very famously, out of the pulpit and out of the church and into nature itself. This is George Whitefield, perhaps the most famous of the preachers from the Great Awakening, preaching outside, right, amongst the trees, amongst the fields, and bringing religion out into the world. So how does these elements of American mythology work itself into Clutch's art and their music? So we'll start with Pastiche. I'm going to show you a few album covers because, again, low-hanging fruit. This is Clutch's second album, Transnational Speedway League, Anthems, Anecdotes, and Undeniable Truths. I mean, even the title just does all the work for us, right? This kind of folk tale, mythological, tall tale kind of vibe. But also when we look at the cover, it plays around with all these ideas of American iconography. This is probably a roadside inn somewhere with the hoof of a deer and the deer itself being prefigured on the lamp, and plays around with ideas of artificialness, nature, and American culture. Pressing forward to from Beale Street to Oblivion, Beale Street, of course, being a very important street in the history of American music and blues and so on. And just look at the occult elements that are hanging out in the background of this pastiche. Whatever is going down here in the basement beneath this tree, perhaps prefiguring the tree of life. You have sort of like a reaper or a witch figure over here on the right, and then all sorts of like weird figures looking down at you, the crescent moon, and so on. So the mishmash, the eclecticism of pastiche is on full display here. And then Psychic Warfare from 2015. By the way, Clutch dedicated this album to, or not dedicated, said that he really influenced this album to Philip K. Dick. We can say a whole thing about Philip K. Dick's pastiche and mobilization of mythology and so on. But with this album and more recent ones like Book of Bad Decisions and other albums from recent years, they move towards even a criticism of American culture, right? We're using this pastiche, right? Melding images of Lovecraftian, cosmic horror sort of vibes with this person in the dive suit, angel figures on, this is like a cannon from an American warship, and way more critical approaches to pastiche and its uses. A great example of that comes from the album that gave this talk its title, Strange Cousins from the West, which again in itself does a lot of the heavy lifting. The track is literally called Minotaur, and the myth of the Minotaur and the labyrinth are used to critique modern contemporary American society, right? The city is the labyrinth, which contains the Minotaur, who bellows hungrily for labor, the sweat of the people who work there, and their money and consumption and so on, and even goes on to say, fate is the idiot's excuse, freedom is the sucker's dream, but we hope you find some measure of comfort in considering us to be your family, which is, of course, very tongue-in-cheek, right? This sort of American bear hug and the unrelenting nature of its corporate culture. Pressing forward, we can also see a lot of tall tales in Clutch's use of mythology, like the track Immortal from Pure Rock Fury, perhaps Clutch's most famous album to date and one of their best. And here as well, the lyrics, they don't waste any time and they hit right at the point. And it's basically a boast track. You can almost imagine Neil Fallon saying this before combat, right? Before a duel or in an arena. I'm the man who stole fire for the people. I'm Prometheus, right? I cause trembling in the bones of evil. I carve mountains into cathedrals. I have the blood of lions. I am immortal. Also going back to what we just heard about Icarus, who rides the solar circle with no hands, Ma, who found the ark inside Tex Arcana, who asks the questions that have no answers, which is, of course, me, Neil Fallon, or Clutch as a whole. And it's kind of a grandizing tale, again, of the hero and his myth. And then lastly, the divinity of nature and how nature and the Church of the Heart kind of mix into American culture. is most exemplified by, full disclosure, my favorite track by Clutch, White's Ferry, where Neil describes, perhaps this is in Pennsylvania or on the Appalachian Trail or in the Ozarks or something like that, and talks about the relationship between holiness and nature, and most importantly, how the holiness of nature is better than the holiness of the institution, right? The Wizard of Tickets here is not a good figure, right? He charges the Pilgrim's Fare, but Fallon encourages us to take the country air, right? To break free from this Wizard of Tickets and to only believe the dirt. Right? And divinity is vanishing among the leaves, and that is where it is to be found. And lastly, the benediction is the benediction of the moss, right? The moss to prosper upon our brows. Of course, going back to the Christian sort of anointment. So that is the last element, and perhaps one of the most important and the most subtle in how Clutch used this or build this sort of idea of the natural cathedral into the American mythology. So to conclude, I hope I've shown how Clutch both deploy elements from pre-modern mythology in and of themselves, right, without any ulterior motive or metaphor intended, like in the story of Perseus, and how they are not afraid to draw from eclectic sources and meld them into their own sound. And lastly, how they participate in this construction of an American mythology, a cultural artifact, which, just like pre-modern mythology, underpins ideas of belief, individuality, society, and its either its boons or its disadvantages, and so on. There's a lot more that I could have said here, and this talk could be twice as long. So I want to use Burning Beard, again, one of the most famous songs and one of their best video clips, to kind of showcase a little bit more of what I missed. I'm just going to show a minute, and then we can go to the Q&A. Try to see Neil and how he positions himself on stage. He's literally on stage here. The figure of the preacher, and kind of like the personal power and tall tale or hero myth, which is centralized in this video. Of course, it's literally in a church. Okay, this song goes on to, the video goes on to show Neil like kind of like levitating and literally setting his beard on fire. But for lack of time, you'll have to watch it by yourself. And that is it. Thank you so much for listening and for having me.